Hi, and welcome to the second video on research statements in the Career Essentials series. In this video, we're going to look at how to write an effective research statement. So by the end of this video, we hope that you'll be able to recognize all the elements of a research statement. You can develop a plan to assemble your own research statement, and you'll be able to assess what effective writing in research statements looks like. Here are the 5 elements of a research statement. Now you'll notice that the future plans are in the middle. And writing a research statement does depend on you having some idea of what you'd like to do in the future. If you haven't got that far, don't worry, but you might be better off starting with a document that we've linked in the video description called Future Research Ideas Getting Started. And the other 4 elements of the research statement are your research vision, the context of the research, your track record, and how the work fits in the institution. So let's take them step by step. We're going to start with research vision. So what is research vision? It's kind of, if you fast forward, let's say 5, 10, even 20 years ahead, what do you want to do with your academic life? So how do you actually write this or start writing it? So if you think of what you would like to be known for in terms of research in the future, you or your research group, if that's relevant to the field that you're in, what is going to be this long-term contribution? Can you write that down maybe as a postcard to yourself in the future? It's literally that brief and that high level, if you like. So if you can write it down in a few sentences, test it on people, ask people's opinion to make sure it excites them as well. And next we're going to assess what effective vision might sound like. So now let's assess what effective communication of a vision might look like. So I have a paragraph there for you to read, and I want you to do a bit of a jargon spotting exercise on it, and then I'm going to show you a rewritten version and see what you think, if the second version is better. So it's very easy for me to say write in a high level, but it does take practice because it's quite different from writing, let's say, a thesis or writing a publication. I think the key is not to go into too much detail or use this jargon, and that's why I wanted you to do the jargon spotting exercise. So let's look at what that might look like if we look for the jargon, highlighted the jargon in blue, and then you can see what I think is exciting in the second version. So do you think the second version, the second paragraph, is better? You might notice I still had a little bit of jargon there, so let's see if we can make that even better in the next slide. Basically, a vision should be something that anybody can understand, or anybody who's reading it can understand, and it should be something you think, oh, that's really exciting, that vision is really interesting. So here is the final version of the same vision we were talking about on the previous slide. I've just made one small edit. I've taken out the word sentinels and put in implants instead. So hopefully now it's jargon free, but it's nonetheless still exciting work. So that's a good example of a vision. So using that example of the research vision, how would we define effective communication in research statements? I think the style best to use is one that you get your message across without the reader having to work excessively hard. And that means using simple and straightforward language, but be assured your concepts are not dumbed down. The concepts are still complex, but the language you use to describe them can be very straightforward. A good test is to explain the work to somebody in a different discipline and see if they understand it. And that's really important to be able to do, because the research statement can be read by people, from a wide variety. And that brings me to the point of knowing your audience. Even in a department application, there could be quite a broad spectrum of research covered in that department. And do have pity on a busy academic who's reading your application, and they're juggling so many other things, and they may not have that much time to read the research statement. So maybe less than 5 minutes. Does your main message get across? What can really help energize a text in terms of language is using not using the passive tense, and using the active verbs and active tense when you're describing your research. Now let's move to the context of your research. So what's the context? Well, a vision says what you want to achieve, but it doesn't say why it's important to address a certain research question or problem. Sometimes the impact is for the academic discipline, sometimes it's for something much wider than that. It doesn't matter. The point is it needs to be more important than just to you, and that's what the context is. So research questions rarely, probably never come out of the blue. So give some brief information on what's been achieved so far. Using the 3 questions I've listed on the slide, record on your phone as if you're talking to a friend the answers to those 3 questions. Play it back and write it down. Do you need to do any more reading to set this in context? Then test it on people. Try reading it out loud to them. Ask people's opinions to make sure it excites other people as well. And now we look at some examples. So let's assess what effective communication of the context might look like to help you refine what you have already recorded on your phone as what you see as the context for in your research statement using the prompt questions we had in the previous slide. So I'm going to show you 2 paragraphs. They're from very different research fields. And I want you to have a read of those and then think about, what draws you in. And 2 things are important with the context, again, is, do I understand this work? And it should be easy to understand. I can understand both these 2 contexts from very different research areas. And then I'm going to highlight what drew me in. It must be something that you think this is important to do. This research really counts. And I think that's what makes a good context. So related to context is the state of the art. How far has the field gone? And state of the art in a research statement is not a major literature review. It's kind of a summary of how far the field has got to this point. And again, here are 2 examples, and you can read them, stop the video, read them, and see what you think of them. What do you notice about them? So what I noticed is they explain the context, explain the state of the art in very different ways. One is talking about an unexpected finding that kind of opens up a new area. The other one talks about that the state of the art is limited because of some methodology limitations. So both kind of talk about the state of the art and present it so the reader knows that you're really up to date with the state of the art and how that opens up the research you want to do. So next, let's look at your track record. Here we state why you need your track record in your research statement, but how do you actually do it? You need to be able to show the impact that you've made in your career so far. A track record is probably something that you're writing and talking about more frequently than any other section of the research statement, so it may be easier to write. So let's now look at some examples in practice. So what do you include in terms of track record? People include the main outcomes of the research from PhD onwards, impact in their field, notable research breakthroughs, publications, prizes and awards, invited talks, any funding you've secured, collaborations you've initiated, and other evidence of the fact that you're an emerging leader. So I'm going to show you some examples here and highlight where I think, what they show, if they're showing outcome, if they're showing impact, leadership potential. So you can stop these. Again, these are from different fields, and hopefully you can see the different areas that I've highlighted. Some of the sentences have all the properties of outcome, impact, leadership. So they're not mutually exclusive, but trying to give the point of the areas that you want to show. And very important in track record is your potential to be a leader. So the next element we're going to look at is how your work fits into the institution you're applying to. Fit is often the element that candidates pay the least attention to in a research statement. And why might that be? It may not seem like your job to say how you fit. You might reasonably think that's the job of the people assessing your application. But in fact, talking to academic selectors, they say that if you research and articulate how you fit into a certain department or role, it shows that you're really serious about the application. So key questions to think about with fit is, how does your research fit with what's already happening in the department you're applying to? How will your research enhance that department's or institute's reputation? And with whom would you collaborate with, and be specific? And now we look again at some examples. So with the research you've done in the department, talk about the fit as the candidate has done in the first paragraph here. And it's okay to name names without contacting the person, but if you aren't sure, you can check with contacts who know the institution or country and see what the etiquette is or the culture of that organization. In the second paragraph, we see how this candidate aims to enhance the department's reputation by bringing their own network and their own skills. And last but not least, we talk about your future research plans. So the most important element of the research statement is your research plans, but this is not a research proposal, it's high level. What will you do for a longer time frame? And it doesn't include detailed methodology. 1 page or less in terms of content can do the job. Sometimes the research statements are longer, but they're not very long documents. And if you pause the video, the following questions are a framework for your future plans. There is a link below in the video description to a document that includes these questions and other prompts to get you started with your research ideas. And the following 2 slides will let you visualize how people might come up with a research idea with a real life example of it. So here's a mind map visualization of a research question. For some visual learners, this works better than a list of questions. In this case, the person who's written this has put the solution at the center of the mind map, and then all other aspects come out of that. So that was the advice to start with the solution. And the next slide, we're going to look at a real life example of. So with the framework from the previous slides, you can see the real life example, the solution, the problem, and all the other aspects that are important in the future research. So finally, I want to talk about structuring the research statement. I think it's important to say there's no one way to structure a research statement. On the right-hand side, I've done a pie chart of a rough estimate of how much space you might dedicate to each element. Please note this is not absolute, just based on our experience of reading effective research statements. You can use different proportions effectively, but what's clear is that many people are not spending enough time either talking about their future research plans or talking about the fit in the institution. To make sure they're both in there. Track record should be limited to what is most relevant for this particular future research rather than all your track record. And then we have a checklist of all the things that you want to make sure you've included, and these irrespective of the structure, so that is quite handy, and that includes all the 5 elements we've already looked at. And my final tip on structure is consider talking about the vision and context really early on. Go straight to that rather than going into the past research. Saying that in past research, don't bury all your key achievements and make sure that people know what they are, but make sure that the vision and the context get early airplay. So what do you do next? I think the main action from today is, if you haven't already, is to start writing your ideas down. Don't worry if they're not fully formed. The process of writing will help you achieve that. If you're looking for inspiration, you'll find examples of research statements in our CV book for PhDs and postdocs. And we've plenty of short examples in the research statement excerpts document that's you'll find linked in the video text here. And they're excerpts from effective and successful research statements to give you an idea of good practice for the different elements. Share your draft with colleagues and friends inside and outside your discipline, and do book an appointment with the Career Service on our booking platform Handshake to get your research statement reviewed by a career consultant. So thanks very much for listening today, and do look at all our other resources for the other elements of your academic applications, and we hope to see you soon.